Game night at our friend's apartment was supposed to be easy fun, the kind where you laugh at bad Pictionary sketches, trash talk over Uno, and fight for bragging rights that last until the next get-together. But the second my girlfriend, Jessica, announced with a sly grin that she was teaming up with Jason, her so-called work husband, because, in her words, we've got better chemistry anyway, the entire room seemed to shift. The air turned tight. Laughter faltered, and a knot twisted in my chest as everyone exchanged side glances, half amused and half awkward, while Jason chuckled like it was the greatest compliment of his life, sliding an arm along the back of the couch as if to stake a claim he hadn't earned. I forced a smile, trying to pretend it didn't sting, but every round that followed felt like salt rubbed in a wound. Jason leaned close to Jessica, whispering hints like they shared a secret language. She threw her head back, laughing in that unrestrained way she used to laugh with me, and I couldn't ignore the tiny touches. Her hand on his knee when she doubled over at a joke, his fingers grazing hers when they high-fived, the way she lit up at every one of his quips while barely acknowledging I even existed. My friends noticed, too. I could see it in the way Sarah shot me pitying glances and how Mark's jaw tightened like he wanted to say something but didn't, because calling it out would have made the moment more humiliating than it already was. So I sat there simmering, pretending to be invested in the game, while every fiber of me screamed that something was broken. Jessica had always insisted Jason was just a friend from work, the kind who brought her coffee when she forgot breakfast, the one she vented to when her boss piled deadlines, the guy she texted memes to because he just gets it. And I swallowed my insecurities because I didn't want to be the jealous boyfriend who couldn't handle his girlfriend having male friends. But watching them now, wrapped in this careless, flirty energy right in front of me, I realized it wasn't just insecurity, it was disrespect, plain and public. When Jason and Jessica won the final round of charades and she jumped up throwing her arms around him like she just conquered the world, I felt something inside me snap, not in an explosive way, but in the cold, quiet way where you know a line has been crossed and there's no going back. And as everyone clapped, I was already planning my next moves, because if she wanted chemistry with her work husband, then I would show her what real consequences looked like, not by yelling or begging or making a scene, but by turning the tables in a way she wouldn't see coming. A revenge not fueled by rage, but by precision, patience, and a little bit of poetic justice that would remind her exactly who she had underestimated.
The car ride home after game night was suffocating. The kind of silence that hums louder than any argument, and Jessica scrolled through her phone like nothing had happened, smiling faintly at whatever Jason must have texted her, because every few seconds her screen lit up with his name, and she tilted the phone slightly away from me as if I couldn't notice. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, every muscle in my forearm straining with the effort of not saying anything, because the old me would have snapped, asked her outright what the hell that was back there. But the new me, the one born the moment she hugged Jason like she was his girlfriend, not mine, knew better. Silence was stronger than shouting, patience sharper than anger, so I let her live in her bubble of arrogance, thinking she had me fooled. Well, I quietly began pulling strings behind the scenes. The next day, I started small, checking her Instagram stories and noticing how often Jason's name appeared, little inside jokes, coffee break selfies, memes only they shared. And the more I saw, the more it confirmed what game night had exposed, that Jessica had built a second relationship under the guise of friendship, one she flaunted while expecting me to accept crumbs of respect. Instead of confronting her, I dug deeper, casually mentioning her job in conversations with mutual friends until I pieced together Jason's patterns too. He wasn't just single. He was the kind of guy who bragged about being irresistible to coworkers, the one who lingered too long at happy hours, the one HR probably kept an eye on but never caught. I decided that if Jessica wanted to risk everything for Jason, I'd let her, but on my terms. And I began a subtle campaign of distance, pulling away in ways she didn't immediately notice, saying I had extra shifts when she wanted to hang out, leaving her texts on read longer than usual, no longer volunteering to drive her places or handle her errands. Meanwhile, I started rebuilding my own world, reaching out to people I had let slip away because I was so focused on her. Mark invited me to hit the gym with him again. Sarah asked if I wanted to join her trivia team on Thursdays. Even my sister commented that I sounded lighter on the phone. And each time I said yes, I felt more like myself, less like the guy orbiting around Jessica's moods. But the real revenge was brewing quietly. Because while Jessica assumed I was still hooked, still blind to her little work husband flirtations, I began gathering proof. Not to throw in her face immediately, but to hold until the moment it would sting the most. Screenshots of her Instagram posts, a copied folder of her late-night WhatsApp chats with Jason that she carelessly left open on her laptop one afternoon, even photos Sarah discreetly snapped at another game night when Jessica was practically sitting in Jason's lap. I didn't rage, I didn't accuse, I didn't beg, I just smiled, acted normal, kissed her forehead when she least expected it. And in those quiet moments when she looked at me with faint guilt in her eyes, I knew she could sense something shifting, but couldn't put her finger on it. That was the beauty of it. Revenge isn't loud, it's quiet, deliberate, and patient. And I was biding my time until the perfect moment when Jessica's carefully crafted double life would collapse in front of the same people who once looked at me with pity. And instead of me being the humiliated one, it would be her, standing exposed, with no Jason to hide behind, no jokes to make it cute, no chemistry worth saving. Only the crushing weight of realizing she had played the wrong person, and the game was finally, brutally, over.
I spent the next few weeks sharpening the plan into something that looked accidental to everyone else, but was surgical in execution. Because the worst humiliation is the one that seems to happen by fate rather than by a dramatic ambush. First, I deepened the distance, quiet dinners with friends, poker nights that conveniently conflicted with Jessica's late shifts, a subtle reintroduction into the social orbit I'd once lost. So when I suggested a low-key rematch game night at Mark's place, the same place where everything had started, nobody thought twice, and Jessica agreed almost too eagerly, confident that this time she'd steal the show again with Jason by her side. What they didn't know was that I'd turned the rematch into a stage. I collected every piece of evidence I needed over the past weeks, screenshots of their flirtatious chats left glowing on her laptop when she'd rushed out for coffee, the Instagram DM threads with inside jokes that read like private dates, the photos friends had taken when the two of them had been foolishly careless, and I put them together into a quiet clinical slideshow that I titled Chemistry, Unedited, because humor deadened the knife. To make the reveal unavoidable, I enlisted Sarah and Mark as accomplices. Sarah agreed to act like she'd accidentally left her thumb drive in Mark's laptop, and Mark agreed to cue up a funny montage of photos from previous game nights when everyone arrived, which is why no one batted an eye when the laptop screen came to life. The room was warm with booze and chatter. Jessica was radiant in a way that felt like challenge now, her laugh a little louder, her shoulder grazing Jason as they leaned in together. But beneath my calm, I felt the tight satisfaction of someone who knows the exact moment the domino will fall. The slideshow started with harmless stuff, snapshots of inside jokes, the goofy faces from last month, then slid, almost seamlessly, into the messages. There was a screenshot of Jason texting her at midnight, asking if she missed him after a meeting. Another where she teased him about his cologne, and he replied with a heart emoji, timestamp showing how many evenings their banter stretched into the small hours. The room's energy shifted. Laughter became awkward coughs. Jessica's smile fractured, and then went still, like a photograph losing its color. Jason tried to laugh it off. That's not full context. But the evidence marched on. There were the photos Sarah had handed me, taken at a previous get-together where Jessica's hand rested on Jason's thigh. A picture of them whispering in a corner while their partners looked bored. A sound clip, obtained only because Jessica had left voice notes synced to a device and Mark was able to save it, where she told Jason she couldn't wait to see him outside of work. Words so casual and so intimate that it felt obscene when they hung in the air. People in the room shifted, eyes flicking between Jessica and Jason like the light in a theater turning on after a scene. And the closest thing to a sound was Jessica asking, voice small, "How did you," as if I believed there was some polite explanation I hadn't allowed.
He made a clumsy joke that landed like a pebble in a pond, no splash, then tried to reach for Jessica, but Mark, with an awkward politeness, blocked the move by refilling someone's drink, and Sarah handed me my phone with a text I'd drafted earlier and scheduled to send to the group if the mood curdled. It read simply, "You two have been living a double life in front of everyone for months. I thought you should see this." It was blunt and final, in a way that felt right, and I pressed send. The flurry of reactions felt like a physical thing. Whispers, the scrape of chairs, a friend excusing himself to make a call, someone whispering, "I can't believe she did that." And Jessica's face, which had been a fortress, collapsed into something raw and adolescent. Shame, then anger, then the panic of a cornered animal. She stammered about context, about jokes, about "it wasn't like that," and for a brief, ridiculous second, she tried to make it a laughable misunderstanding, like two teenagers caught passing notes in class. But the notes were hundreds of messages deep, and the photos were indisputable. Jason, who had been smiling only weeks before because he'd thought he was clever, found himself shrinking under the same gazes that had once lifted him up. And the strangest part was that my victory tasted like something more than triumph. It was a cleansing, the release of all the humiliation I'd swallowed for months, and yet I didn't gloat. I let the room do the work, because the social currency of friends and colleagues is heavier than any personal argument, and seeing their faces shift, disappointment, surprise, the calculations of who would now remain friends with whom, was a kind of consequence more effective than a shouted confrontation could have been. After the reveal, Jessica fled to the bathroom and stayed there a long time. Jason tried to text her, then put his phone down, his hands shaking. A few people quietly left, uncomfortable to be in the middle of a private collapse, and others stayed to whisper about what this meant for future invites and group dynamics. When Jessica emerged, her eyes were rimmed red, and she said nothing to me, not even the bitter, "How could you?" Only a hollow, stunned gaze like someone watching the ground fall out from under them. I said one thing as she passed me, a tight, even sentence I hadn't planned but felt inevitable. "I gave you space to be honest. You chose embarrassment instead." And it landed. The rest ricocheted through the night. Apologies muttered, denials attempted, friendships quietly reevaluated. And as for me, standing there while my friends processed the truth, I felt strangely free, like the air had finally cleared after a storm. And even though the wound that had opened in me would take longer to stitch, the public unmasking had shifted the ledger. Jessica had to face the fact that her private flirtations weren't harmless. Jason had to reckon with the person he'd been when he thought no one important was watching. And I, who had planned the precise exposure, had reclaimed something I'd almost lost: self-respect. Though I knew revenge is rarely the end of a story, it's a turning point, and the next chapters would prove whether I wanted quiet closure or something more final. But in that living room, with the slideshow still on the screen like cold evidence, the balance had been corrected enough for now.
In the days after the reveal, the fallout unfolded like an avalanche, slow at first, then unstoppable, because word traveled quickly through our circle, and suddenly Jessica wasn't just the girl who joked about better chemistry with her work husband. She was the girl who got exposed in front of everyone for taking it too far. Invitations that once casually included her now conspicuously left her name off. Mutual friends stopped replying to her texts, and the group chat where she used to dominate with emojis and memes went quiet whenever she popped in, until she finally stopped trying. Jason fared no better. His reputation at work, which had once been charmingly cocky, became tainted with whispers of the guy who flirts with coworkers even when they're taken. And though I wasn't the one to spread the screenshots beyond the game night group, the story had legs of its own because gossip rarely respects boundaries. So soon his coworkers knew, his boss knew, and the very dynamic Jessica had once giggled about, the harmless little work husband joke, was now a professional liability. Jessica tried to patch things with me, of course, texts saying we need to talk, long paragraphs about how I'd embarrassed her in front of her friends, tearful voicemails about how I should have come to her first instead of blindsiding her. But I knew better. She wasn't sorry about what she'd done, only about how it had made her look. And if she had truly cared about us, she wouldn't have given Jason pieces of herself that should have belonged to me. So I ignored the guilt trips, offered no explanations, and focused instead on the clarity I'd gained. Because once you see someone in their truest colors, it's impossible to repaint them in the shade you used to love. The sweetest part of revenge wasn't that I'd embarrassed her. It was that she had embarrassed herself. I had simply provided the mirror. And now she had to sit with the consequences, stripped of the validation Jason once gave her, rejected by the friends she once leaned on, and cut out from the relationship she thought would bend around her choices. Meanwhile, I thrived quietly. I poured myself into work, earned a promotion sooner than expected, built back my friendships stronger than before, and even started to date casually again. This time with women who laughed with me instead of at me, who respected boundaries rather than mocked them, who understood that partnership is about loyalty in the moments when no one else is watching. But even as I moved forward, Jessica lingered in the periphery like a ghost of her own mistakes. Sometimes I'd see her name pop up on mutual friends' socials. Sometimes she'd send a late-night message asking if we could just meet once to talk. And once she even showed up at the coffee shop where she knew I worked, her eyes searching for some crack in my resolve. But each time I looked at her, I remembered the smirk on her face when she chose Jason as her partner, the laughter that had excluded me, the arrogance of believing she could have both of us, and my spine stiffened. Revenge, I realized, isn't always about destruction. It's about reclaiming your dignity, about flipping the script so the one who mocked you must now live in the shadow of their own mockery. And by staying calm, by never giving her the reaction she expected, rage, jealousy, desperate forgiveness, I had won something far more powerful than a single game night. I had won my freedom, and she had lost the version of me who once would have done anything to keep her. A loss she would feel long after the whispers died down, long after Jason moved on, long after she understood that some mistakes aren't forgivable, not because of pride, but because they reveal the truth too clearly to ever be unseen.
Sarah's birthday dinner should have been ordinary, but when I walked into the restaurant and saw Jessica already seated near the end of the table, the air shifted. She looked thinner, paler, like someone who had been losing more than just sleep. And though she smiled when our eyes met, it carried a desperation I couldn't ignore, a silent plea for recognition, for forgiveness, for anything that resembled what we once had. But I gave her only a nod and took my seat across the table. She tried to weave herself into the conversations, laughing a little too loudly at Mark's jokes, brushing her hand against my arm as if old habits could erase fresh wounds, but I leaned back casually, indifferent, letting the touch fall away as though it never mattered. And that small rejection seemed to cut deeper than any words could. Jason wasn't there. By now he had been shuffled out of her department after multiple HR complaints surfaced, and rumors said he had abandoned her once the scandal stained his reputation, leaving her exposed, discarded, and alone. But still she carried herself like someone trying to salvage dignity from ashes. The table buzzed with chatter, glasses clinked, and for a while she played the part of someone unfazed, until dessert arrived and Sarah raised a glass, thanking everyone for coming and joking about how our old game nights had become a little too dramatic to survive, drawing laughter that swirled around the table like smoke, excepted Jessica, who froze with a brittle smile, color rising to her cheeks. That was when I leaned in slightly, my tone even but deliberate, and said, "Games are funny like that. You think you're winning until the scoreboard tells the truth," the words slipping into the laughter like a blade disguised as a joke. And though I didn't look directly at her, I felt her stiffen across the table, her fork clattering softly against the plate as she excused herself to the bathroom. Conversation resumed without her, but the mood had shifted, everyone aware of the unspoken weight she carried, and when she returned, her eyes were glassy, her shoulders hunched, though she tried to force another smile. After the dinner ended, as people spilled out into the cool night air, she caught me by the car, her voice trembling as she asked, "Is this really it? After everything? After all the years?" And I looked at her, steady, letting the silence hang before I answered, "No, Jessica, it's not after everything. It's because of everything." And the words landed like a final gavel, sharp and irreversible. She blinked rapidly, as if holding back tears, but I didn't wait to see them fall. I opened the car door, slid inside, and left her standing under the streetlight, small and fragile against the shadows, a silhouette of regret in a world that had moved on without her. Driving away with the windows down and music rising in the night air, I felt the kind of freedom that doesn't come from anger but from release. The certainty that I no longer carried the weight of her choices, that her betrayal no longer had power over me, and that the truest revenge was not the slideshow, not the whispers, not even her humiliation, but the simple, undeniable fact that she no longer mattered, and that I had walked away whole while she was left behind with nothing but the echo of her own mistakes.
Weeks turned into months, and life settled into a rhythm that no longer carried Jessica's shadow. My mornings were filled with workouts and strong coffee, my evenings with friends who laughed without tension, and somewhere in between, I started dating again. Not out of revenge, but because I realized I deserved the kind of love that didn't come with disclaimers or work husbands hiding behind jokes. Still, Jessica wasn't gone entirely. Her name lingered on the edges of conversations, her face appeared in mutual friends' tagged photos, and every so often I'd catch her staring at my Instagram stories within seconds of posting, as if she was waiting for some sign that I missed her, some opening she could exploit. But I gave her none, and that silence seemed to gnaw at her more than confrontation ever could. One evening, as I was leaving the gym, I found her leaning against my car, eyes rimmed red, hair unkempt in a way that spoke of nights spent crying more than sleeping. She started with the usual lines, "I miss you, I made a mistake, we had something real," but this time her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard before, raw and unpolished, stripped of the arrogance she once wore like armor. I let her speak, let her empty out the excuses, the apologies, the desperate bargains, and when she finally fell silent, waiting for me to scoop her out of the hole she had dug, I simply shook my head and said, "You wanted chemistry, Jessica. You got the explosion. Now you're left with the ashes." And though the words were quiet, they struck harder than any scream could have, because she flinched as if I had physically hit her. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back, unlocked the car, and drove away without looking back, leaving her standing alone under the harsh glow of the parking lot lights. From that night forward, she stopped trying. No more texts, no more appearances, no more desperate attempts to rewrite the past. And I heard later through Sarah that Jessica had moved to a different city, maybe to escape the whispers that never quite died, maybe to start over where her mistakes weren't carved into her reputation. As for me, I carried on, not with bitterness, but with a sharper clarity about what I wanted and what I would never tolerate again. And though revenge had once been the fuel that kept me going, it transformed into something else: self-respect, growth, the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had not only survived betrayal, but turned it into a foundation for something stronger. Even now, when I look back on that game night, the smirk, the laughter, the arrogance of her words, I don't feel anger anymore, only a detached kind of gratitude. Because Jessica taught me the cost of disrespect and the value of walking away. And in the end, the sweetest revenge wasn't her humiliation or her regret, but the simple fact that I was free, thriving, and happier without her, while she remained a cautionary tale of someone who mistook betrayal for chemistry and ended up learning too late that real chemistry is built on loyalty, not jokes.